Hello, reptile entrepreneurs. This is your host, Bill Strand, and today we have a podcast about podcasting. I have on Eric, Burke, and Owen McIntyre of the Morelia Python Radio Podcast, and this podcast has just celebrated its 10th anniversary of being on the air. So as a podcaster, this is a very special episode for me because these guys have accomplished great things in the art of podcasting. Now, if you've ever thought about podcasting, please pay attention to this episode. Part of the purpose of the Reptile Entrepreneur Podcast is to encourage and facilitate content creation, meaning writing, blogging, YouTubing, or podcasting. And I talked to Eric and Owen about what it was like to start their podcast and what kind of advice they'd have for people thinking about starting a podcast. So hopefully some of you out there are thinking about it and can join our ranks because we don't have enough reptile podcasts, and we'd welcome some more. So please join me in welcoming Eric and Owen of the Morelia Python Radio Podcast. Hello, reptile entrepreneurs. We are here with Eric and Owen of the Morelia Python Radio Podcast. And this is a significant podcast because I believe they've been on the air longer than I have. And so this is history. This is I'm going to be able to ask them questions that I want to know about how it was back in the day. Eric and Owen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep.
So, for the listeners, let's just start off with an introduction of both of you. Let's start with Eric, and then we can go to Owen. I'll play traffic cop here, and then we'll get on to the podcast.
I'm Eric Burke. I've been doing Morelia Python Radio was an idea that I had back in 2010, and a lot of people at the time, I was inspired by reptile radio, and that was a huge inspiration for me, which I think was really the only podcast around that talked about reptiles. And I thought, what a genius thing to share information, to be able to listen in to breeders and keepers and share their passion with people. And but I wasn't a big ball python fan. So I wanted to do carpet pythons, and everybody told me it was too niche of a topic, and we wouldn't be able to do more than a couple of months worth of shows. And here we are 10 years later. So yeah, I've been into reptiles since I was a kid. It's just a huge passion of mine. Pythons have always had a near and dear spot for me, and so. Then I met up with Owen over here, put an ad out for a co-host because I didn't want to do it alone. I tried, and it's not easy to do a podcast by yourself, to talk to yourself, as you know, Bill.
Yeah.
you do that sometimes, yeah. And then it was born, and here we are.
Yeah.
Okay, Owen.
So I got into the snakes probably later on in life. It was in college and after college is when I started. I always had the kind of fascination with reptiles, but not snakes. They always kind of creeped me out when I was younger. And then I kind of fell in love with them in college. And I just started my whole snake breeding and keeping journey when I was kind of skulking around and lurking on the message forums for Morelia Pythons because I had a couple carpets and I was trying to learn as much as I could. Is when I saw the ad that Eric said he was looking for a co-host. And I realized that Eric was local to me. He was probably a couple towns over, close by, and that he was that guy who kept buying all those snakes that I was really interested in before I could, because it would always say, like, a lot of times people back then would have websites and they would put down, "Thank you, whoever bought the snake," and I'm like, who is this Eric Burke guy, and why is he buying all the snakes that I want? Like, this guy's going to run me out of business. So I saw that he was, needed a podcast host. So I thought, this is good. I'll get close to him and then I'll kill him. So, but I ended up. I haven't executed any of my plans yet. It's only been 10 years.
You're a patient man.
Oh yes, it's the slow death. So yeah, so we've just been doing that. So, and it was always so we started the podcast about 10 years ago, and our collections have influenced each other, and also guests on the podcast have influenced our collections to where the collection that I have now is nowhere near what I started with, even by means of like species and stuff like that. I have carpet pythons, but everything else is insane. But it's been a lot of just doing guest hosting and stuff like that. So it's been fun so far. And every I think the first year I was like, this will be the last one. We'll do this episode, and then he won't ask me to come back next week. And again, 10 years of that, I've been waiting for him to tell me not to bother coming back next week. But yeah,
he may have plans for you.
Watch out. Slowly, any minute now.
All right. So when was the official start of the Morelia Python Radio?
Oh,
the first episode was in September 25th of 2011.
Yeah, that was the first episode where it was Eric talking to himself in his bathroom. Yeah. And then the next episode, the unofficial start, was when he interviewed me, which was weird because I think that was our second conversation that we had ever had together, and it was like recorded. So, yeah.
And was that in 2011 as well?
Yeah, it was October 2011.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yep. So you've been able to keep this running for 10 years, and it's still going.
Yes. We have to record sometime this week.
And so let's just start talking about what it takes to keep a podcast going and alive for that long. Usually that's the things people ask me. And it's wonderful that now I'm in the position to say, guys, how in the world have you done it?
I think for me, it's always been a labor of love. I figured, meeting so many awesome people in the reptile hobby, trying to figure out what I could give back, what I could make a mark or make it better. I think at the time, carpet pythons in Morelia were very misunderstood. There was a lot of misconceptions about them, and I just felt that there had to be some kind of spotlight for them to sort of show them as another alternative to keeping a pet snake. And I say this all the time, that I think that Morelia Python breeders, whether it's green trees or if it's carpet pythons, they sometimes miss the mark on having this perfect pet snake for people, because they like to perch, they're out in the open, they're pretty resilient to keeper error, and they make just an awesome display snake. They're not too big, but they're just big enough to sort of give you that python feel, if that's what you're kind of looking for. They eat great, they shed great, all these things that people didn't really know. And I think the thing is like, we're always learning stuff new, and where we were in 2011 with keeping reptiles, it's like a whole new landscape. And it just continues to evolve to better equipment, to better ways of keeping and better understanding of how these animals actually work and what can make them live a long life in captivity. So I don't know. That's kind of my thing. It's just the love of the animal, So.
And I would just say it's consistency. I mean, the first 2 years we were on and we were recording live, and we were there. I think the first couple months we did it Saturday at like 8 or 9, and I was still a young guy in my 20s, so I'm like, can we please change it to some day during the week? So we did, and it was Tuesdays at like 8, and it was consistently Tuesdays at 8 for I think the first 3 years, maybe 4 years, where it was like,
Yeah.
if we missed a Tuesday, something weird happened or something bad had happened, or, you know.
I don't think we ever missed a Tuesday.
I think there were several shows where like Eric's working the mute button because he's dying with the flu, and I'm trying to talk to a guest that I've never spoken to. There's that kind of stuff, but it was consistent, and it was building the fan base, and was also Eric and I getting a rapport. Because if you listen to the first couple episodes, it's choppy. We don't know when to stop talking. We don't know when to start talking. We kind of we didn't have any visual. We didn't have any videos. So we were just, you have to hear each other. So it was hard. And also we didn't know each other's sense of humor. And there's one episode where Eric takes a dig at me, and it's almost like you can feel everything in all the ice just kind of like break after that point. Where it's like, all right, now we know we can joke around. Now we know we can have fun. Now we know no one's going to be insulted and all this stuff. So after that point, everything just gets comfortable, and you can just ride it into like 10, 11 years. And you're like, blink of an eye, it flashed by. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what were you hoping for personally in doing something like this?
You know, I guess at the time for me, I was sort of breeding carpet pythons, and you know, it was sort of trying to educate people on it, and I figured what better way than to talk to people that keep and breed these. And not only I guess it was a little bit selfish for me as well, because I was trying to learn from them too, you know. So I always had this perspective of being somewhat new to breeding, to be able to ask questions that a new person to breeding would ask, whereas somebody that's been doing it for years and years and years might overlook these little nuances. And the thing that always struck me is, like, a lot of people will say, like, why do you always talk to people and ask these same questions about breeding? And I guess the thing of it is what I've learned over the years is that it's kind of like baking a cake, right? How you bake a cake here in Pennsylvania is going to be different than how you bake a cake in Colorado, because of just, you know, the environment that you're in, altitude, weather, you know, pressure systems, all this kind of stuff. And that also affects how you breed reptiles, or even how you keep reptiles. You know, you always hear this, I missed, I don't miss, I this, I that. You hear people say one thing or the other. And I think how somebody does it in Texas or California is going to be different than how I do it. So when you're talking to a multitude of different people from all over the world, you get a different perspective on, to be able to pinpoint issues that may come up, or what to look for to again ultimately keep these animals healthy long term. You know.
Yeah. And for me, it was a bridge, because I think I was 1 or 2 clutches seasons deep. I had my first real season in 2010, and then I actually, nothing. I think I got a bunch of slugs, but 2011 is my actual, like, when I first got my first Python clutches and things like that. So I actually was starting, and I never felt like I had enough clout to ask questions or jump into the discussions that were in the forums and stuff like that. So with having the podcast, all of a sudden people who I would idolize know my name, and now we're having conversations, and now we're having conversations that are including other people, which is why the other part of NPR that I love so much is Carpet Fest, which was the bringing together of all these people from online to hang out and have a barbecue, because it just started conversations and relationships where I made a ton of friends that kept all the pythons that I had, and we could bounce ideas off each other. We could talk this way. It was a way to feel more comfortable in the Morelia community. It was able to kind of bridge it for me to, you know, I was always just kind of like a shyer, kind of off to the side kind of guy, which is kind of why carpets appealed to me. They weren't as flashy as ball pythons. They weren't as giant and seemed cutthroaty like retics. So I just kind of went to those. So it was a good way to kind of branch out. So that was my whole point, is it was a good way to kind of keep myself plugged in and meet other people, and it definitely has. So
I think that was a big thing, is like trying to create a community around. I mean, at the time it was the forum, the Morelia Python forum, which
That's gone.
that's going back.
Facebook
But,
killed that. Yeah.
Yeah, but once Facebook started to go, it was, our idea was to sort of figure out a way to bring the community together rather than further apart. Even if we disagreed on things, it still seemed like we were able to, which you don't really see too much in the world today, but it was good to be able to have conversations with people and listen to their ideas and sort of maybe change your perspective. There's been many things that I've changed my perspective over the years, just talking to people and listening from their point of view really opens up your mind.
Okay, so it's been 10 years. How has that changed? And what are you getting out of it now, and what keeps you doing it?
I know it sounds cliche, but I think it's just the love of the animals. I just am fascinated continually, probably more so nowadays. I'm more fascinated with behavior rather than just the breeding side of it. Being able to, the way I keep has changed. The focus on breeding has changed for me. And it's like, and even what I keep has changed. Like I for a long time, I was just strictly a snake guy and just into carpet pythons. And as of recently, I've now Ackie monitors and Kimberly rock monitors and geckos. And, I don't know. It's you can never stop learning, and there's new people that are coming into the hobby that I think have great ideas, and to try to give them a platform where they can sort of put that idea out is kind of what keeps me going.
It's in the beginning, it was always just kind of a way to learn to how to breed carpet pythons better, or learn my way around the morphs and things like that. And through talking with people, and you talk to somebody whose passion is scrub pythons. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at scrub pythons as a potential thing that you might want to get into or even just learn about. And for me, there was a whole point where the show helped expand my horizon beyond coastal carpet pythons into things like Liasis, olive pythons, Timor pythons, even Asian colubrids and things like that. Stuff that you hear the rumors of, and as a juvenile or like as a rookie keeper, everybody hears mandarin rat snakes are fragile and they'll die on you if you look at them cross-eyed and all this other stuff. But by making contacts through the show, I talk to people who have kept them, who have bred them, and they say they're really not as hard, like how carpet pythons really aren't as nasty and evil as everybody says. So it's through that you can help kind of get beyond the veil of a rookie, and it opens it up to where I have a ton of Asian colubrids now, which they're animals that I might have walked past a million times at reptile shows because they weren't on my radar. So it has put a lot of animals on my radar, and it has also put a lot more enjoyment into keeping. So it's not just the same carpet python in every single cage that looks at me the same way, that acts the same way. It's, well, there's carpets over here, there's Timors here, there's white lips here, there's all that other stuff. So it helps keep it to where I am still enjoying it, and I'm still open to who's on this week and what are they going to talk to me about. And I hope it's something that I've never heard about. Like, I hope this is a guy who comes on is the one dude that has dragon rat snakes and was the dude who figured out that you got to feed him frogs. Like, okay, cool. Tell me, like, give me that info. Let me know what's that going to do. Get me jazzed about that. And then there's the rule that we had to implement, I think around year 2, where it's we can't go shopping for snakes while we're doing the podcast, because the show would end. I'd be like, hey, I got like 4 cave-dwelling rat snakes coming, because we were talking to some guy who had them, and it was like, all right, we need to stop that. So that was always the opening up for it too, is that it's helped me enjoy it more than I ever thought I possibly could, than just reprinting carpet pythons. So
yeah, bringing people that had other species on other than chameleons, that was always trouble for me. Because,
yeah, it's always dangerous,
tough, right?
Yeah.
It's
you
tough,
learn just because you're bringing on somebody who's got a passion for that animal, and so they're telling you all about what's so awesome about the animal. It's like, oh goodness.
and they come from the weirdest corners. Like we had Ron St. Pierre, and he was like, you know what? The geckos or what was it? Anoles are only out when there's dew and mist on the grass, and this is where they get all their water. And I'm like, oh, so that's when we should miss the animals. It's like early in the morning, or they get it. They need the humidity, and then all the gears are turning, and you can learn something from somebody who keeps a species that is nowhere near what you keep.
Yes,
and you can use it to increase to better your keeping for this animal to a different thing. And it's that's the problem, is we keep doing it because I keep learning things, and during the show I start thinking about things and turning it and twisting it and how to use it for my own collection. And so.
Yeah, I did a 3-part series on green tree pythons with Patrick Holmes, and just going back and forth about the condition of arboreal reptiles, and it's the same between chameleons, and you're thinking about the same things, and so there's an incredible synergy that comes when you start bringing in people from different communities. It's just wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, you have gone beyond a podcast, and you've now made a network. Not now.
Yep.
You've had it for quite a long time. Let's explain to the audience what a network is, and let's talk about how it started.
So I guess the way I look at the network is just a group of podcasts that sort of is just in the same vein of just trying to get that same message out, right? I think the way it sort of started was the idea that Owen and I are sort of, we have our lane, and we're able to ask the right questions when it comes to Morelia or carpet pythons, or pythons in general. But when you start stepping outside of that box, it becomes a little bit more difficult to ask the right questions for species that you may not be as educated with. So the thought was, like, why not get people that have the same passion as we do, but have them talk about what, whether it be the monitors or colubrids or, what else do we have? Field herping, the Australian perspective, like all these different ideas of putting content out there. And the beauty of podcast is that it's on demand, so you can listen to it whenever you want. It's not like you can, back when I grew up, you had to watch TV at 8:00 on a Thursday night if you wanted to watch a specific show, and those days are done. So you can listen.
If you missed
driving
Ricky
in your
Tikki
car.
Taffy, you had to wait another year.
That's it. So to me, there's it's just limitless content to try to put reptiles in a more positive light, I guess.
Yeah, and we kept getting questions, like requests for shows for talk to this person about this, and we would bring them on. And of course, we're two Python-oriented Morelia heads, and this guy might have a couple scrubs, but then so we'll spend the entire episode talking about his scrubs, but we won't scratch the surface on his like lace monitor collection or this, that, and the other thing. Like we might talk a little bit about it, but not a lot. So we did get requests from people asking to bring these people back on to talk about this, to talk about that. So there was a demand for more shows, and it was much better for us to just find people who were also passionate working in those animals in those groups who could kind of pilot their own podcasts. So we started with a few, and it's just exploded to we have shows that are not even just the basic interview thing anymore. One of the shows is a debate show, and that is something that kind of brings that all about, where it's like they ask a question and each moderator takes a side, and then they spend the whole episode debating some reptile question. So it's good where you can have other shows and appeal to other audiences, and everybody can kind of just enjoy it. There's always something there. We're all going to be cleaning snakes or reptiles, and we're all going to be in our basements or our buildings or our rooms scrubbing away, and either you can listen to music or, hey, maybe there's a podcast you might want to listen to. So why not create the content?
Yeah. I think we waited a while to see if other podcasters would sort of make a show. Mm-hmm. And when they didn't, I guess, I don't know, people are afraid of the idea of creating a podcast or, you know, however that goes. But so, you know, I approached people, some people approached me, and then the ball just started rolling.
So what is the relationship between those podcast shows and you?
Most of them are friends, and if they, you know, they were probably people that we talk to on a regular basis. But
I guessed once or twice, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
or somebody. Oh, okay.
They record a show? Do you just host their do their marketing?
Yeah, they record the show
editing?
and they send. Eric does all the editing.
I do all the
everything.
editing.
You do all the editing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
no. Yeah, I do
I'm
nothing.
going to be part of your network.
I'm a glorified mascot at this point, but they record it, they send it to him, he edits it, and then we put out the show at their selected time so that there's usually a show coming out. They're not all on top of each other. So, yeah, Eric does all that stuff.
I think the thing is like, you know, some people maybe can't. So I specifically so we use Transistor to host the podcast, and the thing with Transistor is that you can host as many podcasts as you want, and it doesn't change the price per month, which is great. And I specifically was looking for that, and at first it kind of started as Carpet Cliff Notes, which was, you know, one of the things that we heard a lot was we would do a 2-hour interview with people, and 2 hours was kind of a long time to listen. You know, sometimes we would go as long as 3 hours, depending on the guest. And there was tons of content there. But you know, we wanted to do something that was sort of, you know, would highlight some of those, you know, parts of the show or little nuggets of information or whatever to sort of put there in a more condensed version, which is where Carpet Cliff Notes really started. And at the time, I don't think that there was necessarily a vision of we want to have X amount of podcasts by a certain time. It just sort of snowballed, you know, with people just coming to us with ideas, and, you know, Reptile Fight Club being one of them, you know, to work with Justin Julander and Chuck Poland, guys that me and Owen looked up to and still do, you know, to be able to give them a platform to be able to talk. To me, it's well worth it, because I would listen to them all day, you know, so.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to start a podcast, what would they bring to you to be considered?
Ooh, that's a good question.
You got to start with an idea, and that's the hardest part right there. And then also you have to kind of almost have a show. I mean, the people who've approached us have always been like here's the show. It's going to be a monitor podcast. It's going to be me, and I have this many monitors, and I do this, that, and the other thing. Is also going to be in my friend here who has this many monitors, and we do that, and we're going to talk to people who do monitor stuff, and that's like, all right, cool, greenlit, go. And then you fly, baby bird, you're on your own. So you got it. Now you have to book the guest, you have to record the session, and then you have to give it to us. Now, if you don't book the guest, or don't have to do the recorder, or don't do anything like that, then your show doesn't get on. We're not going to dog you on it. It just means that you aren't going to having episodes and being consistent and having the next episode and giving people content is what gets the podcast rolling. If you break down and don't provide it, then you're just going to fade away. And that's where a lot of these podcasts, because we've seen a bunch of podcasts start and then fall by the wayside, because people just their lives get in the way. They stop doing it. They get out of reptiles, and it's very easily you can go from having a podcast of like once a week or once every other week, then once a month, then once every 3 months, then you're gone.
And this is one reason why this interview means so much to me, is because this podcast, this Reptile Entrepreneur project is one of the an important aspect of this is I want to encourage podcasters to start and become regular. And the reason is because just the nature of podcasting, it becomes a way that our podcasts happen to be, I think, the place where we get the most growth in the community. Social media tends to be very much of a echo chamber where you fight other ideas, but podcasters, just by the nature of how it's done, every week you get on new ideas. You have to compare them to what you believe and what was on your show before. And so there's a constant sharpening of you as a podcasting host, just by the nature of the media. And so I want to encourage more people to consider podcasting. But as we know, it's difficult to keep a podcast going. It's very easy to get excited, but I did a brief look at all of the reptile podcasts that are out there and compared how many are alive right now and posting in the last 2 months and how many have existed. And I mean, the number is, and this search is like with the word reptile, keyword reptile in it, like Joe's Kaijus I didn't pick up, but
probably not.
So I'm finding less than 90 have existed, and right now I think the active ones are in the 30s, and so and very, very off the cuff Bill doing searching, and so obviously there's a lot of pod fading. Audience, that's what we call it, pod fading. And it's a very open-ended question that I'll ask and let you answer it however you can. What do you see as the reason that people pod fade, and what do you think can be done to keep them going?
I think probably, why are you doing it? You know, if you're doing it because you think it's gonna, maybe catapult you to the top of the reptile hobby, or ego. I don't know. But I think the most important thing is that you have to figure out whatever you can put out consistently. If that's every week, if that's every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it would be, and you just got to keep at it. I think. Yeah, I guess that's a hard one for me to answer because I just don't see myself as any other way other than doing the podcast. Like,
it's become too it's too much a part of us now.
It's just such entrenched in my day-to-day life on trying to create content. I never was there's YouTube, right? And I thought like, I don't want to really be on camera, and I it's not really about that. I want it to be about the guest, and I think it would just be difficult to interview people via, well, at least when we started,
right?
It was
That's
difficult
the other thing.
to do it via YouTube, but now, so I just think podcast just was the way to go to be able to do that. And I don't know. It's just a labor of love, I guess. I don't know. What keeps you around, Owen?
Well, I think it's the thing is that, we say that with reptiles. If you're getting into it for fortune and glory, you have picked the wrong thing. Try again. Podcasts can be the same way. If you got into it because you're going to do fortune and glory, you can do it, but you got to hustle. Like there's a lot to go into it. And I think a lot of people will be kind of daunted by the cost of it versus also what you have to do, what you have to give up to do it. Time spent on a podcast is time spent not doing something else. So you do have to give up that time. And I think that can shy some people away, or life eventually happens. I think Eric and I have been considerably lucky where nothing has ever stopped us from doing the podcast. Maybe like a delay a week or something like that, but nothing has ever stopped us from putting out a recording or continuing the show. I think you can easily get lost in that. You put it off where you say, I'm not going to record this week, I'll record next week. And then that week becomes a month, and that month becomes 2 months, and then the podcast is dead at that point. You try to have a resurgence or some of that, but then it's gone. But then also, I mean, when Eric and I started, we were hosting on a website that would constantly drop us. We were using headphones that we got in the store and microphones and stuff like that. We were constantly upgrading here and there where we could. Our audio was horrible, and it's just, it grows, but you have to keep, you have to keep upgrading, you have to keep pushing, you have to keep moving along. I would say it's actually easier to start a podcast now than it was when we started. And
100%.
It's something that, it does take dedication. It's pretty much starting a radio program. You have to be on top of your game, and you have to be consistent, and you have to be willing to put in the time. Otherwise, it will fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I think maybe the idea of pod fade is that people don't realize how much work goes into putting together a good podcast. You have to research it. You have to contact the guests. Talk.
You have to be flexible so you can talk to the guest when they're available, because we've had guests in Australia and other parts of the country where it's like, I really don't want to talk to somebody at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, but you know what? Whatever. Like, it's got to get this, got to get the episode, got to get the show. So, and it's also being open for other things, because we've done shows as a result of a herping trip, where it's like we went there and did that. So you got to be able to try to find the content wherever it could be and use it. So
okay. Well, podcasting in the world, in the outside reptile world, is growing. We hit 1 million podcasts, but it's still not necessarily mainstream. So we still have a lot of growth to go. But within the reptile world, what do you see for the future of podcasting within the reptile community?
I hope that for me and for us at the network, it's always trying to make it better. I think I approach it like I approach reptiles, and trying to always learn more and up the game, and listening to listeners' feedback. They like this, they didn't like that. I don't know. I hope that it continues to grow, because I just think that there's so much information that could be learned from podcasts, because I think it's becoming, I see in maybe 5-10 years, radio stations and stuff don't exist. Even if people listen to that, it just seems like this is where we're going. And to be able to be a nobody in Pennsylvania and be able to be putting content out is kind of cool. It's
to help the community at all. I mean, this has been my hobby and my passion for close to 12 years, something like that now, and it was something that did help me bust out of my shell, and something I've thoroughly enjoyed. So if I can help by highlighting somebody who I think is doing well in the hobby and is doing everything that should be done in the hobby, or has an interesting story, or is historic, somebody who we helped pioneer this one species, and that's why you see it on somebody's tables, because this guy went somewhere and pulled it out of the jungle and was the first one to figure it out. I want to make sure that that's there, that's out there, that those stories are being told, because we found in Morelia and other species that we kept hitting these brick walls where people are like, well, why is it called an M-Pen coastal? Well, yeah, because the guy's name is Michael Pennell. That was the guy who produced the coastal line. And people are like, oh, MBB coastal. Well, that means Madame Blueberry, because that was the name of the animal that had all these babies that were really cool looking. And people didn't know that because the people that started those things and those stories are out of reptiles or aren't on social media. So people were just rolling with it and not knowing the history behind it. So if the podcast can help bring that to the forefront, I want to do it. So, yeah.
I think, I hope that young podcasters that are thinking about starting a podcast or coming into the world of podcasting sort of look at the people that did it before and see how can they do it better, to constantly be pushing that growth of whether it's a better sound or, better editing or, more professional setups or studios or in-person stuff, if you look at podcasting outside of reptiles is where I get a lot of my inspiration and try to see how I can apply what they're doing into the reptile world of podcasting. So I hope that's where it goes.
Okay, so let's talk about somebody who says, I might be interested in doing a podcast on my favorite species. What would your advice be to them to give them a good idea of what they're in for and how to prepare for doing a successful podcast?
Ooh, okay. So if you're particularly interested in a species, I would first probably, maybe try to get involved with the community at some way and sort of see what's out there. I think for me, what I did is I just sort of got a notebook and I just wrote down anything I could possibly think of that I would want to know about carpet pythons. Just like, and if an idea popped in my head when I was listening to somebody else, I would jot it down. And I still to this day will refer back to that notebook. Hey, can we do this? What can we do here? Well, remember when we talked about that? Just to try to sort of get an idea. I think the mistake I think that we made, well, I guess maybe it wasn't a mistake, but maybe with the newer ones is that I would say get 4 interviews down or 4 shows recorded before you even start to
put
your show out there, just because if you're going to put it out once a week, now you sort of have something in the bank so that if something does come up, you sort of have something to fall back on and you sort of get your feel or whatever. But I think just pick a species. It's just like with keeping reptiles, right? I think a lot of times people gravitate towards what other people tell them are cool, as opposed to what they personally think are cool. So like if you like garter snakes, then go do a podcast on garter snakes. Don't not do it because you think ball pythons are more popular or leopard geckos or whatever the case would be. Or don't think that you have to sort of fall in line to what other people say, because we experienced that with carpet pythons. There's like, nobody wants to hear about carpet pythons, and there's only 10 of us that like them anyway. So what do you do? Like this kind of idea. But I promise you, there's people in this world that if garter snakes are your passion, they're going to be tuning in every week to learn what you and the guest have to say about garter snakes. Yeah. So just do what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I would say also then plug into the community. Like if you're passionate about garter snakes, find your people. Find everybody else who's passionate about garter snakes too and ask them, what should I do a show on? What are your questions? Who would you like to see on the show? Because you might not have a connection, but somebody you talk to might be like, oh, I know a guy who does research with garter snakes. You should talk to him. And
I think
do that.
Oh, go ahead.
I
think it's easier today because back when
those people.
I think today it's easier to do that because I think back in 2011, if you were to ask somebody to do a podcast, they would be like, "What? What are you talking about?"
A lot of people said no until we got more episodes in, and then they realized what we were doing, and they were like, "Oh." Yeah. So it's.
So many of my guests don't even know what a podcast is. They say, I don't want to be on camera.
Yeah, that's another thing, being on camera and, technology, people struggle with that. And
we've had to have a few people help out to get guests on the line who aren't really tech savvy. You know, I think there were a couple of shows in the early days where the guest never made it. And it was just Eric and I talking for 2 hours because it was there. So, like I said, I would say just find like-minded individuals, and you can just, I mean, we all have those conversations where we're talking with people who are interested in the same reptiles that we are, and you'd be surprised how 2 hours flies by. I mean, we've had those conversations with people of come on the show, and they're like, I don't know if I can talk for 2 hours. I guarantee you can. And it'll shock you how quickly it happens. So, yeah.
Okay. So what is the future for you both and Morelia Python Radio?
Yeah. Again, just always trying to, I'm trying to work on some ideas to sort of make Morelia Python Radio more polished every year, to try to up the game with guests and people that people want to hear from, or topics, or just trying to make it as professional as can be. Being one of the ones, or the one that's been around the longest, I think we sort of have, I don't know if it's chosen or whatever, but we sort of have this, we should be doing it. We should be the most advanced, right? Because we've been doing it the longest. So I don't know if I'm saying that right, but like, just for equipment and just how we do it and different ways. Like an idea that we had is just like sort of a series that we sort of started at Morelia Python Radio was herp history, and to be able to get the story of what herpetoculture was like in the early days, I think is priceless for new people, because I think a lot of the perspective for newer people is that they just take for granted when they go to a reptile show that X reptile that's sitting on a table is there and captive bred and whatnot, and they don't understand the history behind it. Personally, I kind of geek out about the history of herpetoculture, and I kind of love the stories and just things that happened, and how we are where we are today, and maybe we can learn from the people of the past and have a different respect for them, because they don't have a platform to sort of to get that out there and their story out there. And one of the things that really brought that to light for us was being able to interview Rico Walder before he passed.
Oh, wow.
And that is going to live forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's there forever. And for people to be able to go back and listen to that and listen to him and hear what his thoughts were directly from him, not through anything else, just his direct thoughts, to me is that's kind of what keeps me going. But just things like that, just little things to sort of to keep the edge going, I guess.
Yeah, one thing that we are doing that is being lost is there aren't that many books being written anymore. It's like we're losing history because everything's going digital, and the people who are used to the written world aren't necessarily making that transition. And I know some of my most cherished episodes are the ones where I'm providing a digital footprint for some of the people who have been around, who were the people I looked up to, who helped me
Correct.
when I was coming back up. And they're not leaving the kind of digital footprint that the people around today would. And so it's like there's this chunk that's being lost. And as a podcaster, I'm able to preserve some of that. And that's one of the most special things that I feel I can do.
Yeah, I mean,
100%,
we talked about the archive that we have, and we had Dr. Richard Ross, who wrote the Blue Bible of Python and Boa breeding, and he was on and telling us how he was breeding white lips in his basement in wood crates that he built, and they had a light bulb as a fixture, and it's just like.
To hear the story of him accidentally leaving the heat off
doing it. Yeah.
Oh, no.
And then
Yeah,
he
and
saw
that's-
breeding happen. It's like, oh.
And that's when he figured out they need a cool down cycle. But everybody else now just automatically knows that they need a cool down cycle. But they don't know the story of that this guy figured it out and he wrote this book. And Eric and I have talked about it a million times that the one table at a reptile show that we think is overlooked a ton is the reptile book table. There's one at every show. And
Yeah.
there's stuff, there are treasure troves of things on those, of like books written by people. And even then, just sometimes, if you don't want to get into some of the breeding and science of it, there's sometimes books written of just stories of expeditions to go find things that are insane. Like Eric's got that herping podcast where they just talk to Mark O'Shea about going to find the original rough scale pythons and things like that, which, you know, people, it's some things that you don't think anybody would ever do. So I think with us in the future, I know Eric and I are definitely recording more things video wise because we've done a ton of things and had a bunch of really kind of cool adventures that nobody else was there to witness. It was just kind of us, or you know, going to Australia, looking for those animals in the wild and things like that. So I think the future for us in NPR is we're going to add more of those things. But I think Eric and I are going to keep doing this till one of us is dead. Like at this point, it's, you know, it's never going to stop because I don't think we could at this point.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I see lacking in the reptile world is, and me and Owen have talked about this, and it's sort of what he's bringing up, is that there's a few YouTube channels where they focus on like the natural history of the reptile. Like go to the environment, look at the environment. Don't make it about. It's more of an Attenborough style type of thing rather than it be about you. It's more about the animal. So we've traveled to these places and been on these excellent herping trips and to sort of document that in a way that really doesn't focus on us, but focuses on the animal. And to me, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is like, you know, field herping is something where if you really want to learn about an animal, that's where you go. You know, you go to the environment, you know, and in today's world, well, maybe not with COVID, but pre-COVID, it was a lot. It's pretty easy to get around and sort of go to these places and for the most part and check out some of these reptiles in their natural habitat and sort of, you know, to get some temperature readings or get, you know, some UV readings or, you know, what is the animal doing? Where is it at? Well, you know, when did you find it? You know, all these things that, you know, keeping it in a box, we can sort of answer these questions, I guess. But if you really want to know what's making that animal tick, there's nothing like getting it into the environment, because I can reach into my carpet python's cage and be able to tell if the environment feels right because I was there. I know what it feels like, you know, which I think you can't really experience that unless you've experienced it. So I think we're trying to sort of up that game and try to take the podcast to a whole nother level, but
outside the snake room into the real world. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to Arizona a week from now. I'll be on a plane to Arizona, and this is Eric went to Texas earlier this year to go look for rattlesnakes. Now it's my turn. We can't both be on the same plane in case one of us dies. The show can continue. So yeah, I mean that's just, it has to be that way. So, but I'm excited, and I would never keep a rattlesnake because I don't think I'm into venomous or anything like that. But I'm excited to go with my friends and experience reptiles in nature. And I'm excited to come back and talk about it when I get back. So that's probably what a lot of the podcast is going to do, is still doing what we've been doing with interviews and keeping, but trying to broaden the horizons of get out and experience the animal yourself. I mean, going to Australia was a life-changing event for us. And I think more people should do it. Go to where the animal that you've always kept in a box in your house, go to where it's from. See it in the wild. It will blow your mind.
So you've had 10 years as a podcast doing audio. How do you see your show growing as far as media? How does video fit in? How do you plan on expanding the social media outreach? How do you see that?
Ugh.
So I'll be honest. I fought the YouTube thing for a while,
Kicking and
because
screaming.
I always felt that a podcast is a podcast, and if you have a YouTube channel, it's a YouTube channel, and they're two different things. And like, if I can't listen to it in my car when I'm driving,
Why
it's
am I
not
doing
a podcast.
Yeah.
But that being said, when I signed up for Transistor, right? So, take advantage of the technology that's there. You can link a YouTube channel to it, so it automatically, upload to that. I would like to get to at some point where the video production is as good as the audio production, and it's more of like a, we all have like nice looking studio type setups where it's not, like what you're seeing now for the two of us is, but
Our offices.
yeah, and sort of make it both. I'll be honest. Again, I fought Instagram kicking and screaming because Facebook was kind of the easier one for me, and it's kind of what I learned. But it seems like Instagram is where the reptile hobby is moving towards, because I don't know if it's less drama or you just get to look at awesome pictures of reptiles, and you can kind of pick and choose what you want to see. So I'm sort of getting that, but I would imagine over the next year or two that'll probably be coming into play as well.
Yeah, I would say we have one of the guys who helps us out with our podcast is Lucas, and he had a YouTube kind of show that he was doing. So having him come in and kind of show us how he does it and how he would go about doing it has really kind of opened it up for us. And we definitely started with baby steps of like little, I still can't do an unboxing video. I feel too stupid, like opening up a box of my own snakes, but it's like, and also it's hard because I'm the only guy here. So how am I filming and grabbing? It's whatever. But, doing this, we have a Patreon where we do monthly just shows for the patrons where we answer questions and we just riff about reptiles and talk. Those have become very fun for me because it's like having a reptile hive mind. And if I have questions, I'll bring it to them. Like, hey guys, do you think this is a cool project to get into? Why? Let's talk about it. And then it kind of opens that up. So it's a give and take. And that's on video. So I would say that video at one point seemed like it was really far out of reach and has now become much more accessible and much easier to do. So I think we'll just end up rolling that into the podcast. But I think it's just going to be business as usual. We're just going to keep rolling with the show. And if we have a cool video of something we found on a herping trip, we're going to throw it onto the YouTube channel. And if it gets likes, cool. If it doesn't, whatever. We're just going to keep going. So,
yeah, I'm in the middle of trying to transition into this brave new world where people, for whatever reason, want to watch a YouTube interview.
Yeah,
I had someone specifically ask me, "Are you going to take your podcast interviews and put them on YouTube?" And I was like, "You want to spend an hour watching us do this when you could be in your car?" And yes, and I mean, you go and yes, Animals at Home network, the Animals at Home podcast. He's found that now his YouTube is more popular. He's getting more people listening to his YouTube than the podcast, and it's just because YouTube is such a huge reach, and so there's more people going by, and they put it on, and people are okay putting it on for ambiance and listening to it, so they're treating it like a podcast, and so here I am.
The thing that I'm trying to learn is how do you utilize the platform itself? Like, to me, sometimes the struggle with a podcast is you could be talking about somebody's cage or setup or what an animal looks like, or even if it's a species that you never even spoken about. And like when we do Carpets and Coffee each week, I like to highlight a locality of carpet python. And I can share it right there on the screen so the people that are watching, can see that, So it's like, to me, if we're going to do YouTube, that to me is upping the game. Like how can you make it more like for lack of a better word, a TV interview type of thing where you're actually showing content on top of just people talking, so. But that's a lot of work.
Oh yeah, it's a completely another show, especially if you want to treat each platform special as it with its advantages and make something specifically for that platform. It becomes 2 shows. I mean, with me doing this interview, this is a podcast. It'll be on YouTube and it'll be on IGTV, and those are 3 different shows and I arrange it differently for each one of those. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why Eric does all the editing for the network. Yep.
And that's why I'm interested in asking you about this network thing. So
yeah, that's a lot of work too, no doubt.
Yeah.
As you know. Yeah.
And like we said before, a podcast, it takes time away from doing other things. Having a podcast channel or network takes a lot of time away from things. So, there's a lot to do with that. And we have 2 guys that help us out to kind of lift the burden. And then Eric and I still have meetings where we talk about what can be done this way, that way, sideways to try to, because it's a big undertaking. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And he still puts it out with, he still puts it out good content. I mean, you could do it fast and throw out junk, but now it's one podcast, it's 6 or something like that. Yeah. It can be daunting.
Okay, so question from the podcast side of things: what is it like having 2 hosts?
It's good. I mean, to be honest, he's my security blanket. If I go on interviews without him, I find that I'm just talking about him and the show and everything like that. And it's good to have the riff, and it's good to have the back and forth, and it's good to have, the fun, the jabs, the back and forth. Like I can't. We joke and we kid, and these things become our identities. Like I convinced our entire audience that Eric is very short, and to the point where they see him and they're like,
I don't know,
taller.
on this screen I'm way shorter.
I know, right? It's weird, right?
I believe it.
It's that happened, and he told the audience about how I lost it on him at one point when we were discussing the validity of Bigfoot, and now that I have Bigfoot stickers mailed to my house. Like it's that kind of stuff.
You just made a mistake, my friend.
Shut up.
Bigfoot, huh?
Nobody mail anything to my house. So it's that kind of thing where it's good to have somebody play it off of, and it's good to have somebody to work with it, and it's good to have ideas and stuff with each other. And he would go on these rants about how he wanted to do this, this, and this, and I would drag him back to earth and be like, we have to do this stuff first. So, and it's also good with that of just having the rapport. And it can be hard. If you have 2 podcast hosts and they don't gel, it could just be a bunch of really awkward silences and some bad interviews. So it can be difficult.
Yeah, I think the key is, like, me and Owen are a lot alike, but we're also a lot different. His interests are different than mine, but somehow even when we kept, how we keep, how we bred, all these things that, like, we're coming from a different perspective, I think ultimately is great for the listener, because they can see that although we might not necessarily do the same thing, we're getting similar results. And ultimately, I hope that shows the community at large that you can disagree with somebody or do it a different way, and it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just, this is what's working for you in your room with your specific animals. And I think sometimes sort of that gets lost, and we think we're baking cakes and this is the recipe and you follow the recipe. And to a certain extent that is warranted. Yes, you need some sort of base to sort of bounce off of. But like, I think the fact that, and then, to actually like like I actually do like Owen. He's a good guy. You know what I mean? So it's like,
There's a lot to like
that makes
about
a
me.
difference as well, and, I think that's a huge part of our success, to be honest, is the two of us. I don't know if we would have been as successful if it was one or the other, or if it was somebody different. I think, the stars aligned. It's just like a band, right? You have magic. Sometimes you have magic. Sometimes you don't. I just feel like, I knew from the get-go that, Owen was the guy, and, we sort of, obviously the test of time, we've stood it, and there have been times where we have
driven each other,
got frustrated and
mad,
wanted to stop doing it and whatnot. But
and that was the other thing, is that there were moments where there was a couple moments where I thought about quitting, where social media can be brutal to somebody who throws himself out there, especially anybody who. And the problem is that people on social media know exactly where to hit you and hit you hard. And then they scamper off into the ether, and then you're left there with you and your own thoughts, which can be bad. There was one point where I was getting on to the show to record the show, and I was going to tell Eric after the show was over that I was quitting, that I was done. And at the end of that show, I decided I'll tell him next time. And
glad that was a good show.
It was, it must have been. Thank God it was a good show. But it was, and it was partially because I didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't want to do that. And also because it's fun talking with my friend at least once a week, and various other friends that we have all over country, world, whatever. So that next episode where I was going to tell him I was going to quit, that turned into the next episode. I'll tell him I'm going to quit. And that turned into the next one. And then I just forgot about it. Just forget about it. It's fine. Just keep rolling. So it's that. And I imagine that if I was one person doing the podcast and I didn't have somebody else to help me, go through dealing with something like trolls deciding that they've had it in for me this week, I could have quit and I could have walked away. And that's where it also is good to have some kind of support structure in the podcast to just, because I'll talk to him about it and we'll go back and forth. And then those conversations never leave the green room before we start the show.
Yeah.
And it's a way to vent all my frustrations and get all this stuff out. And then we do the show. So.
Yeah. As you know, it's not always easy putting yourself out there in the public light, and,
Yes. You become very noticed.
Yeah. You're not doing it right if somebody doesn't hate you for some unknown reason. But I like to wave at those people because they're still listening to my podcast every week, hating me. I don't know why they're doing this. No one's forcing them to, but hi. So,
hello.
Yeah.
Well, Eric and Owen, we can close this up here. But is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I would say don't be afraid to do something, because this whole thing and our whole thing started because Eric wasn't afraid to start the podcast, even though it was just him talking in his bathroom to himself, which I only bring up because it's my favorite. And then the only reason I showed up is because out of that ad that he put on Morelia forums, which is full of carpet python-minded people and some of the best carpet breeders in the world, I was the only guy that answered him. So, and I remember sending the thing and going like, oh my God, you know what? If he contacts me, I'm going to tell him I'm not going to do it because that's insane. Or I'll do 10 episodes and the show will die and then we'll be done. So don't be afraid to do that kind of stuff, because you never know if it's going to pick up speed. If you feel like starting a podcast, give it a shot. See what happens. If you feel like including a co-host, see what happens. It might go well.
Yeah, my advice, what I've learned over the years of doing it, is that there's two types of people in the world. There's people that talk about things, and there's people that do things. Be the people that do things. If you want to do something, You have the power to make it happen. Don't listen to people tell you can't, and figure out how you want to do it and what you want to do. And obviously there's a lot of work that goes along with that, but like, don't be like led astray to think that, again, you can't have a podcast on garter snakes if that's what you're excited about. Do it, make it happen. I guarantee you people will tune in to listen because people are starving for content. Mm-hmm. They want content. I don't keep chameleons. I had one in my life, but I listen to your show all the time, so in the new entrepreneur show, I listen to that all the time too. It's just that, you can get something out of all these different podcasts. There's some kind of nugget of information in each and every one of them. And you can take that and apply it to what you're doing. But the biggest thing is like, if you want to go herp in Australia, do it. Mm-hmm. If you want to, herp in South America, do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you can, or wait for permission or whatever it is. If you want to start a podcast, do it. Just make it happen. People have reached out to me with ideas or whatever, or tips or whatever it would be. Feel free. I'm here to help whoever needs help. Mm-hmm. I can't necessarily say that I can edit another podcast on the network.
Don't make him do another one.
But that doesn't mean that you can't do it yourself. So if you're really passionate about a species or a topic or whatever it would be, just do it. Don't be one of the people that, looks back on life and says, I wish I would have done this, because I don't know. That's not how I want to live. So
yeah. And that was something I think in the first year or two is we were constantly told by other people that, I could have started a podcast. It's like, why didn't you? So do it. Just give it a shot.
Yeah.
Eric and Owen, I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing your experience. You have some real history, and it's been wonderful having you share that.
Thank you for having us.